So a few weeks ago, I made a video saying how fabulous Java moss is and what an easy plant it is to grow. And I was inundated with messages from people saying they can't grow Java moss. Their Java moss has died. Their Java moss has turned brown. Why is it brown? If it's so easy to grow, why can't I grow it? So I thought I would make this video to address some of the issues of explaining why your Java moss might have turned brown. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Richard. So for anyone who's completely new to Java moss, let's take a minute just to explain what it is. Java moss, as the name very much suggests, is a moss which we use a lot in aquariums and particularly in shrimp tanks and aquascapes because it is generally so easy to grow. Unlike traditional plants, it doesn't root into the substrate, but rather is grown tied or glued to rocks or pieces of wood, or it can be left to grow as a free-forming clump in the aquarium. It will attach itself naturally over time if you don't tie it or glue it, but otherwise it's essentially a free floating clump of moss that sits typically on the bottom of the tank and does expand and grow over time. Now, one thing I will say about Java moss is there is an incredible amount of nonsense written about it on the internet. During my research for this video, I must have found at least 15 articles where people have essentially taken the same rubbish and spouted it time and time again. I guess at some point, someone has written the first article and they've needed some reasons Java moss might be brown. And they've said things like, it needs CO2, it needs carbon dioxide injected into the tank. It needs fertilizer, it needs a good light. And I'll be honest with you, what's happened is, I'm guessing what's happened is, people who are writing articles have read that article and gone, that must be what it needs. And they've copied in their own words. And someone else has copied that article in their own words. People have gone onto forums and said, I know why your Java moss isn't growing, it's because it needs CO2. Let me assure you, Java moss does not need CO2. Java moss typically doesn't need fertilizer, although it will need something in the water, but it typically is happy enough with just the nitrates that are created from fish going to the bathroom or from uneaten food breaking down. And Java moss will grow with just about any light we give it. In my shrimp breeding tubs, we have huge clumps of Java moss, and they just grow with typical household LED bulbs. There's nothing special about that. If you give Java moss light, it will grow. So if we know Java moss doesn't need CO2 injecting, and we know it will grow with just about any light we give it, and we know it doesn't need special fertilizer, it just needs fish poop and other natural waste that builds up in the aquarium, it can grow using the nitrates that are from that, then why might your Java moss be turning brown? So in my experience, there are typically two reasons your Java moss may be turning brown. Now the first one is because you have a large clump of Java moss, and that Java moss that is in the middle or at the bottom of the clump isn't getting any light at all. And in that scenario, yes, the Java moss in the middle of the clump or the Java moss at the bottom of the clump typically will turn brown. But for most people, I don't think that's the problem. Nobody contacted me and said, Rich, I've got this huge clump of Java moss and the bit at the bottom is brown. What's gone wrong? I think the other reason is the most likely reason. Now, when many aquarium plants are grown, they are grown with the roots and the bottom part of the plant in water and the top section out of water. It's called being immersed grown. Now what can happen with those plants is some of them, particularly members of the Cryptmelt family, they're notorious for it. You take that, you put it underwater in your aquarium, and the top half, the actual leaves, have to convert. They have to get used to living underwater. And particularly with the Cryptmelt family, it's called Cryptmelt, the top half of that plant will die off almost completely. And then new growth will come. It looks slightly different typically with plants, but new growth, which is adapted to live underwater, will come out. That's called Cryptmelt. Crypts are the most famous for it, but it happens with a lot of different plants. Now, Java moss is typically grown at farms in damp conditions, but not underwater. So what typically happens is, we go to the store, we buy some Java moss, or we order it online, and it arrives in a tub or a bag, and we plop it in our aquariums. And exactly the same as with those immersed grown plants, the foliage isn't used to, the foliage of the moss, the greenery of the moss, isn't used to growing underwater. And what happens is that needs to convert. So that the moss that you see dies away almost completely. And at that point, most people go, that moss is rubbish, and they drop it in the bin. But if we just leave it, 99 times out of 100, just leave it, that moss will start to come back. And it will come back in its submerged form. It will be, the greenery that grows back will be used to living underwater. It's designed to live underwater. Once you get that started, I have no doubt that will continue to grow. Here, we don't do anything special. We don't inject CO2. We don't fertilise our shrimp breeding tubs. We have very basic lights. And yet the clumps of Java moss in there, okay, we sell it to be fair, but if we didn't, it would be a pest. We'd have to bin it. It's perfect for the shrimp tanks. Shrimp, anybody who breeds shrimp or fish should definitely have Java moss. But they certainly shouldn't struggle to grow it. Now, to the best of my knowledge, whilst there are some plants that particularly like a higher or a lower pH, they particularly like hard or soft acidic water, Java moss will grow in pretty much any water you have. It also typically isn't affected by any diseases or problems, although you can sometimes get something like bladderwort or algae growing in it. But when we end up with sometimes get hair algae growing in it, we just literally rip that chunk off, get rid of that, then the bit that's left will grow quite quickly. I'm certain that for 99 people out of 100, the reason their Java moss has grown, if they answer how long have you had your Java moss, they will say for a week or two or less. And that Java moss is just converting to underwater life. It just needs to be given time. Whenever I talk about fish breeding or shrimp breeding, Java moss is always I preach about Java moss. I love Java moss. It really is the secret to almost any successful shrimp or fish breeding tank. And if you want to know how to be successful growing Java moss and how to grow a huge clump, you should definitely watch this video next. Thanks for watching.